All right, moving on, another day, another groundbreaking discovery in Israel, and taking a page straight out of Genesis, where Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt.
Here is the statue of Lot's wife.
The air smells like sulfur. Nothing grows here. The hills surrounding the Dead Sea are crusted white with minerals that haven't changed in millennia. And rising from the salt-covered slope of Mount Sodom stands a formation that shouldn't exist the way it does. Tall, narrow, isolated from the mountain itself. For 2,000 years, everyone who's passed through this desolate valley has called it the same thing. But most assumed it was just a name attached to a natural rock. Until researchers looked closer. You know the story from Genesis 9:19. God decided to destroy two cities drowning in corruption, Sodom and Gomorrah. But one family got a warning. Lot, his wife, and their daughters were told to run and never look back. One simple command. As fire fell from the sky and the ground itself began to break apart, Lot's wife did what she was told not to do. She turned around, and the Bible says she became a pillar of salt right there. Most people read that and think it's a metaphor, a lesson about obedience wrapped in symbolic language. But here's what most people don't know. Ancient historians didn't treat it like a metaphor. They treated it like a landmark, and they claimed they could take you there. If this kind of biblical archaeology interests you, subscribe now. We've got 47 more discoveries like this one, because what we're about to show you has been documented for over 2,000 years, and it's still standing exactly where the ancient texts said it would be. First, you need to understand where we're talking about. The Dead Sea sits at the lowest point on Earth, over 1,400 feet below sea level. The water here is so dense with salt that nothing can sink. The shores are covered in crystallized mineral deposits that glisten white under the desert sun. And on the western edge of this sea rises something geologists call an anomaly, Mount Sodom. It's not made of rock. The entire mountain, stretching over 7 miles long and rising more than 700 feet into the air, is made of pure salt. Solid salt compressed over thousands of years into a formation that looks like stone but crumbles like chalk when you touch it. According to Genesis 13, this region used to be different. When Lot first chose to settle here, the Bible describes it as lush and well-watered, like the garden of the Lord, green, fertile, full of life. But after the destruction, everything changed. The ground became barren. The air turned heavy. Rain stopped falling the way it used to, and what was left behind was this, a wasteland of salt and silence. But here's where it gets interesting. Natural salt formations usually erode in predictable patterns. Wind and rare rainfall carve them into smooth slopes and rounded edges. But on the southern edge of Mount Sodom, something stands that doesn't follow those rules. There's a formation rising from the slope that doesn't look like the others. It stands alone, separated from the main body of the mountain by erosion that carved away everything around it. But while other pillars in the area are thick and irregular, this one is different. It's narrow, vertical, and from certain angles, it looks almost human. The pillar rises approximately 40 feet tall. The salt composition matches the surrounding mountain, dating back thousands of years. But the shape shouldn't have survived this long. Salt pillars form when softer rock erodes faster than harder capstone layers on top. The cap protects what's underneath, leaving a column standing. It happens all over Mount Sodom. Dozens of pillars dot the landscape. But this one has something the others don't, a name that never changed. For as far back as records go, travelers passing through this region have called it by the same name, Lot's wife. The name is ancient. Locals who've lived here for generations will tell you their grandparents called it that. And their grandparents before them. The tradition doesn't waver. It doesn't shift to another pillar nearby. It stays fixed on this one. Now here's the part that made historians stop and reconsider. Because someone documented seeing this exact formation over 2,000 years ago. In 93 AD, a Jewish historian named Josephus Flavius completed a massive work documenting the history of his people. He wasn't writing religious commentary. He was recording what he considered verified history for a Roman audience that demanded accuracy. And in his account of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, he made a very specific claim. He wrote that the pillar of salt that was once Lot's wife still remained in his day. And then he added something that changes everything. He said he had seen it himself. This wasn't folklore passed down through stories. Josephus was claiming he personally traveled to the site and confirmed its existence. During the lifetime of Jesus, this formation was already being identified as the remains of the woman from Genesis 19. That means the tradition connecting this specific pillar to Lot's wife is at least 2,000 years old. Early Jewish writings reference it. Christian pilgrims traveling through the region during the Byzantine period documented it in their journals. Even Islamic scholars who studied biblical history mentioned the salt figure near the Dead Sea. 3 different faith traditions, spanning continents and centuries, all pointing to the same location. But before you dismiss this as ancient legend built around a convenient rock formation, consider what happened when modern researchers started mapping the geography. Because the Bible didn't just say Lot's wife turned to salt. It told us exactly where she was when it happened. Genesis 19 gives us the route. Lot and his family were told to flee from Sodom toward a small city called Zoar. Biblical scholars place Zoar near the southeastern shore of the Dead Sea. The text says Lot's wife looked back while they were escaping, which means she would have been somewhere between Sodom and Zoar. Mount Sodom sits on the southwestern shore of the Dead Sea. The pillar stands on the southern edge of that mountain, right in the path someone would take if they were fleeing from the Sodom region toward Zoar. The geography matches. When you read Genesis carefully, it describes the destruction coming from the sky. Fire and burning sulfur falling on the cities. If Lot's family was moving away from the destruction and his wife turned back to look at it, she would have been facing southwest, toward the very spot where this pillar now stands. Archaeological surveys of the Dead Sea Basin have revealed evidence of a catastrophic event in the region dating back to the Bronze Age. Layers of ash, sulfur deposits, signs of intense heat that transformed the landscape. The same time period when Sodom and Gomorrah would have existed according to biblical chronology. The salt, the desolation, the timeline, the route. Everything the Bible describes about this region has a physical footprint. Now you might be thinking, couldn't this just be coincidence? That's a fair question, and scientists have asked it too. Geologists who study Mount Sodom confirm that salt pillars form through natural processes. Wind erosion, occasional rainfall dissolving softer layers while leaving harder capstone intact. It happens across the entire mountain. There are dozens of similar formations scattered throughout the region, some taller, some wider, some that have collapsed over time. So yes, this pillar could absolutely be explained by natural geological activity. Nothing about its composition suggests supernatural intervention. It's salt, compressed over millennia, shaped by weather patterns that have carved this landscape for thousands of years. Critics argue that ancient people saw a human-shaped rock formation and invented a story to explain it. That locals needed a physical landmark to make their religious texts feel more real. And in most cases, That explanation would be enough. Except it doesn't answer the central question. Why this one? If you're standing on Mount Sodom looking at dozens of salt pillars, why would generation after generation, across multiple cultures and religions, all point to this specific formation? Why wouldn't the tradition shift over time? Why wouldn't different groups pick different pillars and create competing claims? But they didn't. The tradition remained locked on this single location for over 2,000 documented years, possibly much longer. That level of consistency across centuries is rare. Most legendary sites move. Stories change. Details shift as they pass through different cultures. But this one stayed fixed. Which brings us to why this matters today. Jesus referenced this woman specifically. In Luke 17, while teaching about the end times, he gave a 3-word warning. Remember Lot's wife. Not remember the story. Not remember the lesson. Remember her. He pointed back to a real person whose choice had real consequences. She had everything she needed to escape. Clear instructions, divine warning, a path to safety. But she couldn't let go of what was behind her, and it cost her everything. Whether this pillar is the actual remains of that woman, or simply a marker of where it happened, the question it forces us to ask remains the same. What are we still looking back at when we've been told to move forward? But here's what we haven't told you yet. Lot's wife isn't the only person the Bible says was physically transformed. There's another account involving Moses, and what archaeologists discovered on a mountain in Saudi Arabia has caused researchers to completely reconsider.